फिर इसमें करना अभी नहीं।
मैं बाद में करूँगा।
Derek, Professor Russell, you're muted, please. You've muted yourself.
Sorry, I don't know how it happened. Sorry, Dr. K.K. Aggarwal, can you? Yes, he's from a cardiologist, but also Sanskrit and Hindu tradition. Dr. Deepali is a professor of with Sanskrit and specializing in Hinduism from Delhi University, and she's on the Religions for Peace, represents India in Religions for Peace Asia. Who else have I left out here? Rodney, I've done. Sure, Aman Haji is a doctor and from Vancouver, and he is going to be representing the Ismaili tradition of Islam. We should have Bin Shamsuddin, who is from Indonesia and represents the Sunni tradition, and he's from the Religions for Peace for Asia. Okay, with that.
I think Dr. Russell, the participants are waiting and they're asking whether they want to be let in. And yeah, Dr. Derek, you'll have to start the recording also. You're muted, Dr. Derek.
Yes, recording is started. I've admitted everyone.
Yes, thank you.
So we're going to quickly introduce a very short introduction, and then you'll all have Professor Mary Matthew is the moderator for today. She has been doing this, and Dr. and Colonel Derek is the moderator and looks after the questions and the chat box. Will be bringing in people from the participants who would want to join in.
Dr. Russell, your voice is very soft. You'll have to either come closer or increase the volume on your...
No, so this is the full, I think. Yeah. Anyway, I'll talk as loud as I can, and we'll.
That's better. That's better now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's just that something has happened here, but I'll try to get that back. So I should be back. Anyhow, so have all come in?
Yeah, and the recording is live.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I'll put the this thing
link on the link. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to all our colleagues from around the world who have joined us today for this important 21st webinar in our series of the UNESCO Chair in Bioethics. Right? Just for you to know, the UNESCO Chair in Bioethics has about 250 centers in 58 countries across all the continents. And we will have colleagues here from all parts of the world, from different parts. Now, I am Professor Russell D'Souza. I am the head of the Education Department of the International Program of the UNESCO Chair in Bioethics, and I'm also the chair for Asia Pacific Division. And it gives me great pleasure and delight actually to bring to you a very important webinar today, where we are going to be looking at the important issue of bringing religious leaders and looking at their role along with scientists in providing ethical support and guidance to the community, mitigating the impacts of COVID, which all of us together in the world are at the moment taking it in our stride. We are in solidarity taking this, and we hope we will all come out together successfully. And today we have this great combination. Before I go on further, let me ask Professor Dr. Mary Matthew is the head of the Indian program, but she is also the co-chair and is going to be the moderator of this program. I'm going to ask her to welcome you, and also Colonel Professor Derek D'Souza, who is also part of the head of training in the UNESCO Chair program. He will be also moderating your questions and the chat system. So before I go further, can I quickly ask him to
Thank you, Dr. Russell, and I'm sorry that some of you are not able to hear Dr. Russell well. He's having problems with the audio, but we shall try and sort it out. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our panelists and our participants. This is one of the most interesting webinars that we've had in our series on interfaith and the role of science and religion in mitigating COVID, this pandemic. And we have a wide array of speakers here who are distinguished in their own ways. And today we'll hear from, we'll get a very broad perspective regarding religion, the role of religion and the role of science when it comes to COVID-19 pandemic. So as always, please put your questions on the chat box. This is for all the participants. And Dr. Derek D'Souza will give you the house rules and instructions. And please, as far as possible, mute your audio and microphone so that we can save on the bandwidth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mary, and always a pleasure to be here. It's wonderful to see such a distinguished array, and it's truly multi-faith and interfaith, which is what we had desired. I have put the YouTube live link into the chat box, so this can be forwarded to your friends and colleagues, and they just have to click on that link and they'll be connected to this webinar wherever they are. And even later on, you have the privilege of watching this as a recorded version later, because I know certain parts of the world it's very early in the morning, so you can send it to them later. Other than the panelists whose videos are on, may I request all other participants to kindly keep your videos off as well as your audio muted so that we don't disturb each other. And in case you have something to add to the panelists or request from the panelists, you can put it in the chat box. Our panelists as well as we shall be monitoring the chat box, and we shall forward your questions to the panelists and get your doubts cleared. So with that, I hand you over to Dr. Russell. Dr. Russell, you can take us further, please.
Okay. Thank you.
You'll have to switch off one of the
Just mute one of your
mute one of your computers. You've muted yourself, Dr. Russell.
I'm sorry about that. Okay, so today we are going to see, we're going to be having an interesting program, as I said earlier, and we'll have global leaders from faiths and religions, and alongside with the global leaders in science, joined together for a far-reaching panel discussion. Now, I want to remind all of us that, you know, one of the important things that I learned, and I've been doing some work with spirituality for a long time. Alongside, I'm a psychiatrist, initially a thoracic physician before becoming a psychiatrist. Now, one of the things that I came to know was the issue of science and spirituality. Now, traditionally, science and spirituality went together, close together in the East, whereas somewhere in the West there was a split, and that has continued for a long time. But I want to bring one important issue here. In 1893, on the 11th of September, Swami Vivekananda addressed the World Parliament of Religion, and he made a statement there that the union of science and religion will alone bring peace to the world. And I think that is an important, well, it was said in 1893, and we're going to see here from Professor Karad and so forth, who will talk more about this. Then again, not long ago, on the 12th of May this year, a few months ago, this is what the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said. The COVID-19 pandemic is not just a global health emergency. It is indeed a human crisis that is upending lives, destroying livelihoods, and deepening mistrust around the world. Religious leaders and faith-based organizations have a role to promote solidarity as the foundation of our response. Now, this solidarity is based on the human rights and human dignity of all, and particularly reaffirming our faith in the common humanity that we are all part of. Again, the WHO Director General has also made a statement that faith-based organizations and religious institutions have been in the front line mitigating the impacts of COVID-19 and providing communities with the much needed comfort, guidance, and indeed support, care, and social service for the communities they serve. And so we see this as an important avenue that we brought all of you together. As you can see, from 5:30 in the morning, we are here at 9:30 in the night, across this beautiful globe that we all have inherited, and we together are now going through this. And I want to congratulate, thank you all for coming together. Thank the distinguished panel that we brought together. Thank the participants from around the world who are here with us for this, to look at and to listen and to see what we can take back and demonstrate the solidarity as in the humanity that we are all part of. So, without too much of time, I want to quickly take you through introducing briefly, because every one of these very distinguished panelists here could probably spend half an hour to 1 hour giving you their biodata. But I want to bring to you quickly, before I will then hand it to Professor Mary Matthew, who will take you through starting with a message from each of these, from their traditions and from the science that they represent. So let's start with our first, Professor Macheri Kesavan. As I said, is the Stanley Cobb Professor and the Chair and Academic Head of Psychiatry at the Beth Israel Reconnaissance Medical Center, which is at the Harvard Medical School, and he's the editor of Schizophrenia Research, very renowned journal. He joins us from Boston. We have, again, the very distinguished Professor Dr. Vishwanath Karad, who is the president of the World Peace University. He's also the UNESCO chair in for peace and democracy. But he has a very particularly important, he's a professor in engineering, mechanical engineering, and he's the chancellor of the MIT University. But very importantly, I had the privilege of witnessing the Peace Dome, which is now the biggest in the world. It was conceptualized, designed, planned, and created under the guidance and supervision of Professor Karad, Vishwanath Karad, who is an educationalist and indeed a proponent of peace, and has in fact hosted the World Parliament of Religions there. So that's and he comes from represents science and education in this, and of course interfaith. We then have with us here Emeritus Professor Desmond Cahill, who is from the RMIT University, and he chairs the Religions for Peace Australia. He's an ordained priest and indeed part of our committee. He is also part of the UNESCO Chair's Melbourne unit of the UNESCO Chair in Bioethics, and he's taken an active role in bringing this together. Then I want to introduce you Rabbi Professor Ira Bedzo. Rabbi Professor Bedzo represents Judaism, and he's from the New York Medical College in New York, and heads the Bioethics in Humanities. The important role is that he's a senior scholar for the Aspen Center for Social Values and has published books in Jewish philosophy, Jewish law, and Jewish poetry. So we then go on to Professor Dr. K.K. Aggarwal, who is here with us. He is a cardiologist and the president of the Confederation of the Asian Medical Associations of Asia and Oceania, which includes Australia and New Zealand, and he also represents the scholar in the Hindu tradition. So, K.K. Aggarwal, and then I'm very delighted to bring to you Reverend Dr. Masaki Matsura. He represents Zen Buddhism. He's the 16th generation Zen priest in the Rinzai tradition, and following his Zen.
Sorry about that. So I'll continue with. Yeah. So we have. So we have Dr. Masui Matsura, who is the head abbot at the Botsumoji Zen Temple in Chiba in Japan, and of course he goes between Japan and USA, leading the work in seminars and retreats. We'll go on to then introduce to you Father Philtos Maroudas. Father Philtos Maroudas is talking to us from Greece. He's usually based in Germany, I'm told, and he represents the Christian Greek Orthodox Church and tradition. And we'll also then have to introduce to you Dr. Natalie Mobini, who is the director of the Office of External Affairs of the Australian Baha'i community from Queensland, Australia. And I'm delighted then to bring to you Professor Shafiq Virani. Now, Professor Shafiq Virani is an academic and the professor of Islamic Studies at Toronto University, Canada, but he's talking to us from Edmonton, and so it's very early morning there. And he also is from the Ismaili tradition. And then I'll take you to the Venerable Futan, who represents the Mayavana Buddhism and the president of the Buddhism Council of Victoria in Australia. And who else is there? We have Professor Rodney Clarkin, who represents the Baha'i tradition from, he's a professor in North Michigan University in USA, and he joins us from USA. And then Dr. Aman Haji, he is from Vancouver, a physician who is also with the University of British Columbia, and he's representing the Ismaili tradition. And finally, we have Dr. Deepali Banut, who is a scholar in Sanskrit and Hindu tradition. She is from the Delhi University, based in Delhi, and represents India on the Religions for Peace Asia. So with that I know that
Professor Russell. Professor Russell.
Some of them have got a lot
Professor Russell.
really distinguished number of publications and CV that will take a long time, but I think we'll all together enjoy the discussion and the messages they're going to give us. So,
Professor Russell, this is Dr. Kaisar Sajjad.
Which is
I'm also here.
Yes,
Professor Russell.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
He was to be with us, Professor Din Shamsuddin.
So, Professor Shamsuddin is there. He's there.
And from Jakarta, University of Jakarta, and he was representing the Sunni Muslim tradition. So,
yes,
with that,
Professor, can you listen me? The Dr. Kaisar Sajjad from Pakistan.
We have a number of you here. We're going to get your messages, but it is we will be continuing, and some of you, we will have the discussion. We will be continuing next. We've got the next webinar 22 also with the same, and so we will continue with this discussion. So, Professor Mary Matthew, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Russell and Dr. Kaisar from Pakistan. We will come to you. We are aware that you're here with us participating. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And
right.
Thank you. To all our panelists, before we start, I'd like to just give a few instructions since we have about 14 speakers today, 14 panelists today. We may not be able to answer questions this time, but what we are going to do is, at least I hope that all our panelists will get a chance to introduce, the introduction is done, to say a few words on how I'm using this, the phrase that Dr. Russell had used, that is the union between science and religion. Will it alone bring peace to the world? So we'll start with Professor Keshavan from USA. Professor Keshavan.
Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Professor.
First of all, I'm honored to be part of this illustrious panel and to be asked to speak about the interface between science and spirituality and how they might have lessons for us to cope with the current COVID pandemic, which Russell has really pointed out that is probably the most severe, unprecedented global stress that we are all facing in our generation. And I am in my main job, I'm a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist, but I have an interest in, not an expertise, but an interest in spirituality, and my familiarity is with the Hindu tradition. So I'm going to say a few things about how we may glean some lessons from Hindu spiritual scriptures, such as the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, which can help us build resilience in this current pandemic for those with the illnesses, their caregivers, as well as those at risk. The ancient Hindu scriptures speak about three paths towards a better understanding of ourselves and a choice as to what is the right sort of action. In this sense, I would say there is a parallel between science and spirituality, because the way I think about Hindu spiritual traditions, they are actually a science. What we learn from the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita is basically a science of the self. So that is where the first path is what is called the path of knowledge, also called Jnana Yoga, which is cognate with Jnana or cognition. The path is to understand, to have an accurate awareness of the nature of one's self. And this will help us to reframe our thinking from an individual ego towards a universal ego, to move from an I mode of thinking to a we mode of thinking, which is very much needed for collectively mitigating the spread of the pandemic. So, just to point this out a little bit further, it is the we mode and not the I mode that would have to make us not only wear the mask in order to protect ourselves, but protect others as well. So, if we only focus on the I, like a number of leaders in the Western countries have done, from the country where I come from, for example, here, that can lead to disastrous consequences in the pandemic, which we are witnessing. The second path of action is what is called karma yoga in the Upanishads and the Gita. It is about the art of selfless action. Being truly aware of the nature of self will help us to move towards selfless action, which is critically important for all of us, caregivers, frontline workers. We need a framework, we need a moral, ethical framework to continue efforts in the face of these uncertain consequences. When it is a doctor trying to help a patient with COVID in a ward, he is putting himself or herself at risk, and his family. And he may even be in situations where he or she has to make decisions about who to provide services when there are resource limitations, who to save, what life to save and what not to save. And that requires a moral compass, which is provided by the spiritual traditions, such as the Hindu traditions. Finally, the traditions, when I say this, Hindu and Buddhist traditions, this applies to all major traditions that are represented in this webinar here. They all provide us with a path to accomplish these goals. And meditation, reflective mindfulness, is an important tool that spiritual traditions provide, which lead to a union between the mind and the body, which is why yoga is the broader principle that is used. And yoga means union or yuj. And that is critically helpful in this current context. And such meditation may improve resilience to the illness and its severe consequences. And just to point this a little bit further, because this is a science-oriented webinar, I would say that this sort of a tool and the healthy living that are promoted by the spiritual traditions like yoga are important to build resilience, not only from the psychological, emotional perspective, but also perhaps to reduce the likelihood of the immune responses that these illnesses produce, and potentially even be preventive. So there is a lot more work is needed to empirically examine these approaches in modern medicine and psychotherapy. And already these principles may be helping many individuals facing and providing care for the COVID pandemic. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Keshwan, just one. You said that Hinduism is more of science. So do you think, do you consider it as a science or a religion, or is it separate? When we talk about COVID-19 pandemic, are we talking about a union of science and religion, or are we saying that it is scientific, totally scientific?
Well, when you say ourselves, what is science? Science is basically any approach to thinking that is based on evidence and testing. And when I say the science and spirituality do not have a rigid boundary in traditions like Hindu spirituality, I meant that the ancient rishis never really accepted anything at face value. They always questioned,
Tested it.
and the one key distinction is that while in modern science we always look for objective evidence of reality, the Hindu rishis looked subjectively. They got their answers through introspection,
All right.
which is also an equally important tool of science.
Okay, so we'll discuss this further once I finish the whole round of panelists, and probably we'll continue it next week too, because we are continuing this seminar. Thank you, Dr. Keshavan. With that, I'd like to go to Dr. Karad, Professor Karad. Professor
Yes.
Karad, yes. Thank you for joining our webinar. And you are the president of MIT World Peace University. You're not only, you represent the Peace University, but you're also an engineer. Professor, we cannot see you on the screen.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us. You're both engineer and you are promoting world peace. What do you see the role of? How do you see the role of both of these? You as an engineer, as well as engineering and peace in COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you so much, Madam. I was asked in the morning by D'Souza that I should really speak initially about the message what I would like to convey.
Okay.
But basically, as you have asked the question, and especially Mr. Keshavan, who spoke about the very philosophy of what India stands for, what Upanishad stands for, what Vedic text stands for, I think I am very grateful to him for the very wonderful words of wisdom which he spoke. Hinduism, in that sense, is not a religion in that sense. It solely depends on the Vedic text, the words of wisdom spoken 10,000 years back. Let me very frankly say, before I make some comments about the very unique predictions made by Swami Vivekananda on 11 September 1893, when he was addressing the first World Parliament of Religion, Chicago. And this is known to everybody now. He made a statement that time, a prophecy. And he told the world to remember that union of science and religion obliques spirituality. It is not only religion alone.
Okay.
Religion obliques spirituality alone will help to bring harmony and peace to mankind.
Yes.
First is the harmony and peace to mankind. What is the pathway which has been shown? And he gives a very wonderful narration of the very wonderful words spoken by the Vedic text, ancient Vedic text. We do not know the time period. But let me honestly tell you that before I make some comments about this, that these very words, of the words of wisdom, I say, data collection, information, and the knowledge is first aspect. But beyond knowledge, there's a wisdom part of it.
Yes.
And which has been very clearly enunciated, stated by the greatest saints and sages of the whole world. If I may say that because I have been trying to do some work in the field of promotion of peace, this is what we are discussing is about the science and spirituality, or science and religion of spirituality. Basically, this journey is something like from Sant Dhaneshwara, philosopher Sant Dhaneshwara, to Albert Einstein. This is a very long journey in time and space. If I make a statement of a philosopher saint of India, Sant Dhaneshwara, who gave the universal secrets or the universal principles 720 years back. I'm telling you, because very learned scholars and thinkers, philosophers are sitting in this webinar. They're very learned people. They're the men of science, men of spirituality, men of religion. I would like to make an appeal to them. Please remember what I'm trying to make a statement. It's not think of mine. But 720 years back, this boy of 16 years of age, 720 years back makes a statement that the entire universe is a manifestation of pure intelligence and consciousness. These are the words. What he's saying? The entire universe, he is giving the very nature of the mother universe.
Yes.
The entire universe. And
So
he makes a statement. He makes a statement that the universe is intelligent, it is conscious, and it has the capacity to really understand each and everything. Now this web technology, what we are doing now, I think many of my friends are sitting in different countries of the whole world. He has made this statement that time. There is no Google, there is no web technology, there is no Facebook, there is no communication systems. But that time, this boy is making a statement to know and understand the very nature of the universe.
Yes,
And he
correct.
says it's real and conscious.
Yes.
I'm using those two words. They're not my words, but let me tell you, friends, I feel very fortunate that I could understand this because I belong to engineering.
Yes.
I belong to science.
Yes.
I do understand what Einstein says.
Yes.
Whether he is giving an equation like E equal to mc square, or the Dhaneshwara gives an equation like about the universal technique, the universal mechanism. How is the human life?
Professor, should
Now-
we separate science and religion is my question.
Madam, basically we have what to understand what religion stands for.
Yes.
Religion is nothing but to perform my own duty.
Yes.
Duty toward the mother, the father, the family, the society, the nation, and the whole world.
Okay.
Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is the word.
Okay.
Basically, religion is also a duty. There is no question of what we are trying to say. The scientific laws, I'll tell you a very simple mechanism. This body mechanism, what for all this, what is going on? We are more worried about the pandemic of coronavirus.
Yes.
What is this coronavirus?
Yes.
What is COVID-19? For the first time in the known human history, this coronavirus has given a command to the entire whole world, 170 nations or more, and they got locked out. Who is the commander? There is one more commander who is controlling the whole universal mechanism. And now this horrifying silence or situation which we are experiencing, and possibly this webinar which we are trying to conduct and discuss, and try to understand what is my duty, what is my responsibility, what can I do and what should I do, what the Security Council members of the United Nations should do, what is the duty of this World Health Organization, where from this virus has come. Is it a man-made virus or it's a natural one? Who has made this? How it has become possible? And for the first time in the known human history, I repeat, for the first time this has emerged in a horrifying situation. There have been viruses, the flu and the swine flu and so many things are plague. But remember, my friends, I'm just trying to let you know my understanding. Being a student of science, being a student of engineering, being a student of particle physics, IT or computer, I do understand. Artificial intelligence or the web technology, what we are talking about, this has become possible. I had asked this question to one of my great scientists of computer and the IT, whether this mechanism, what we are discussing just now, whether it would have been possible to operate this mechanism if the world was not conscious.
Okay.
If each and every particle of the universe is not intelligent, I'm asking the question like an engineering student, that if the entire universe is not intelligent, if it is not conscious, it is not real, then whether such mechanisms would be possible. And this is the question which is completely related to coronavirus. The COVID-19, which has given us a warning to the whole world not to misuse the science, not to misuse the technology for horrifying biological weapons or making the biological weapons, the chemical weapons, like neutron bombs or hydrogen bombs, which are the most mass destructive weapons. And possibly now, with your permission, and with the permission of my friends, I would use one more word. We too understand, we have to, whether it is a man of religion, man of science, or man of spirituality, Hinduism, or Holy Quran, or Holy Bible, whatever text we follow, all the religious scriptures as such, they are life guiding scriptures. They show you the pathway, a code of conduct, how to live and how not to live. That is the mechanism of what religion stands for. Whether it is Jesus Christ, Gautam Buddha, Prophet Muhammad, or the Hindu text, whatever it is being given. But all these texts are personal and for a certain section of society. But the spiritual laws are for the whole of the society. They are universal. Basically, this we must understand, that religions run close to the rule of spiritual sciences. But remember, I'm going to take too much time. But let us see, I'm sitting here before you. This is the body and the brain, one aspect. Body, the brain and the intellect. On the other side is the soul or the spirit and the mind. And it is this mind and the intellect plays a more important role. Now we as men of engineering, men of science, men of spirituality, men of religion, men of philosophy, We have now to understand what is this mechanism. And this mechanism now on the background of this coronavirus needs to be trying to use the positive mindset, positive development of the mindset. It's a destructive mind which is causing the problem. This coronavirus has come out through a destructive mindset. It's a very horrifying thing. It's a rat race. It's a mad power game which has caused this stage of the world. And let me tell you now, and with your permission, I'd like to just read a small message which I just now wrote before some time. My learned friends, all the scholars, thinkers, philosophers, men of religion and men of science, whether this COVID-19 or coronavirus pandemic is a natural one or a man-made, which will continue for quite long, for many more years to come. But remember that certainly it has been caused because of the misuse and a wrong use of the biological science and research, possibly being used with some ulterior motives of developing some biological or chemical weapons for mass destruction, like the hydrogen bombs, neutron bombs, or any other chemical weapons. This mad power game or a rat race of developing the weapons of mass destruction need to be completely banned and stopped if we want the well-being of the entire mankind. And if at all the human race has to see the end of 21st century, it is highly essential for all of us, particularly the Security Council members of the United Nations, to refrain from this mad power game, and rather they should concentrate more in helping the poor and the needy people of the world for their very survival itself. Friends, remember that religion is nothing but to perform your own duty. The duty toward the mother, the father, the family, the society, the nation, and the whole world. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. World as one family, as said in the ancient Vedic text of India. And remember, there is a one word in Vedic text, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudavadan. The truth, the ultimate reality is one and only one. The concept of God, whether you call Ram or Rahim or Jesus or Buddha or any other name, the names may be different, but the truth is only one. Friends, we have to understand now and realize the universal secrets and the universal principles of the entire universe, which is nothing but to appropriately understand the scientific laws. As I said to you, scientific laws of the body and the brain and the intellect, and the spiritual laws applicable to the soul, the spirit, and the mind. And try to understand that the scientific laws and spiritual laws put together make the universal laws, the universal principles, which are eternal and universal. As such, also remember that religion is certainly personal, which is closer to the spirituality, but the spirituality which is closer to the rule of Mother Nature and certainly closer to the universal laws. It is high time, friends, that all the learned men like you and me, working in the field of education, research, innovation, religion, spirituality, and science, they should realize their hope, the very purpose of their own life, which is their religion itself, the duty to work for the well-being of the entire human race, going beyond any caste, creed, religion, and boundaries of nations, and work for the well-being of the entire humanity. We should also note that the highest chaos, confusion, bloodshed, massacre, and has taken place because of the misunderstanding of the concept of religion itself. And hence, it is quite essential and imperative that we should always have an interfaith and interreligious dialogue so as to minimize this chaos.
Yes.
Friends, also remember that all the religious scriptures like Holy Bhagavad Gita, the Holy Quran of Hinduism, Islam, Bible, Guru Granth Sahib of Sikhism, Christianity, they are nothing but the life-guiding scriptures. Friends, remember, as I said before, and as the Dr. Albert Einstein and Roger Penrose has said very recently, in the 20th century. And also the Dr. Schrodinger, which emphasizes that now it is high time for you and me, that we should start the schools of consciousness. I repeat, it's high time for all of us to start the school of consciousness, the reality, the ultimate truth, which will help the human race in the long run to come. This is my personal feeling, personal understanding. Friends, I think this webinar, which has been held on the behalf of the UNESCO Chair for Bioethics, is a very timely one. But I do not know whether we will try to learn a lesson from all this. This is very horrifying. It's a horrifying silence. There's a tremendous fear of death. I'm using that word, which I should not use. But there is a tremendous fear all over the world. Never in the human history such a situation has come.
Yes.
We may not be expressing it very openly, but friends, remember, let us hope that this COVID-19 pandemic will soon possibly vanish. And for this virus, we will have some God particle, some other virus, which is called as a God, the Almighty.
Thank you.
We may call everything.
Kara,
That may be the solution possibly.
Yeah.
And that may be the duty of what religion stands for.
Yeah.
And
Professor,
that will be the, finally, interfaith, intelligent dialogue and understanding the role of science and spiritual component will possibly help in the long run. Thank you.
Professor Karat spoken like a true scientist also about God.
I'm basically,
An
in my
engineer.
mind, there is no difference at all between
Yes.
science and spirituality.
Yes, just
Both
to
are
make
similar.
just to make a point that there is knowledge, and how you use your knowledge is wisdom. So
Information and data is different. Knowledge has a limitation.
Yes.
Beyond knowledge, there is a wisdom.
Yes. And to all the panelists and to the participants also, the difference between religion and the difference between spirituality. So that's very, Professor Karat, thank you very much. I have to move on to the next panelist. I'll go to Professor Desmond Cahill. Professor Desmond Cahill.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Mary, and congratulations on organizing this. I want to speak from both an interfaith and a Catholic Christian perspectives, and begin by saying how the different religions have come together through Religions for Peace International, which is the world's largest interfaith organization. And in recent advice they have given is firstly the need for religious communities, because religion has immense power in the world and an immense moral power. And we know from the social scientists, of which I am one, that despite the negativities of religion, religion contributes to the social capital and social wealth of a nation. And that certainly in the West, the rapprochement between science and the Christian West has been developing, whereas there obviously was a gap between the two for far too long. Now, the guidance that's coming from that body is firstly the need for religious communities to adapt how their communities gather together, pray and practice their religious rituals. And so I think right across the world, there, with some exceptions, the religions and faith communities have been following their government's instructions because of the danger of transmission. And we're now seeing the use of technologies to adapt the religious practices through live streaming of religious worship services and in all sorts of other ways. And it's been quite interesting to see that adaptation. And to see virtual group interactive prayer meetings and also adaptation of burial practices. I've now been to 3 live stream funerals since March, and that's been an interesting process. The second guidance is religious leaders must address misinformation and rumors by combating inadequate knowledge of the disease and the various myths, and to resist stigmatization of certain groups, which we are seeing. And their job as religious leaders is to give hope and support.
Yes.
The other aspect to this is that religious leaders have the responsibility in the spirit of religious moderation, because in today's world, to be authentically religious, one has to be interreligious. And so leaders have the responsibility to reject false ideas, such as that the pandemic is God's punishment or judgment on the wicked world. And secondly, ideas such as, because I'm a good Christian or a good Muslim, a God will not allow the virus to attack me. Now, that is a false religious idea, and we must resist it. And thirdly, religious communities are called to identify and help people at risk. Now, there is an ethical issue here that some have raised, particularly in right-wing Christian circles in the US, that the state's directions to religious communities to cease having them in worship together as a community. Some have said this is an infringement of the right to religious freedom. Now, the right to religious freedom is not an absolute right.
Right,
It
yes.
is a relative right. And so on occasions, the state has the right to intervene, to stop bad religion and bad religious practices. So I think that's very important. The third thing is about religious communities are called to identify and help people at risk through identifying all the different groups that are at risk, and there's many aspects to that. I'd like to finish off, because I don't want to go on too long, is to look at the Catholic Christian perspective. And I think I'll take the cues from Pope Francis, who since March has given 9 very specific addresses on the pandemic, as well as constantly referring it in his other statements and speeches. He says very precisely that COVID-19 is not God's judgment on the world, but it's a call to live differently and more simply with prayer and quiet service in this pandemic storm. And it's made us all realize, as he says, that we are all on the same boat, all of us fragile and disoriented. And our vulnerability during this time has uncovered our false uncertainties. And so it's the time to decide to live differently, to live better, to love more, and to care more. And I think the alliance between religion and science can look at the core religious values of love, care, hope, and connectedness in community, and to emphasize particularly the notion of Christian hope, because no one can live without hope. And the major component of Christian hope is embracing the unknown and the unknowable. And because in the present, there are new seeds of a new future and new beginnings. And therefore, the divine's ability to draw good out of evil, out of bad, out of negative situations. So the religious communities are facing this. There's been many religious leaders, particularly in Italy, where you've had hundreds of priests and nuns have died from the pandemic. The crisis in religious income, because religious services are not being held. And increasingly the pressure as the economic aftermath works its way across the world, the pressure on religious welfare services in helping the vulnerable. And here in Australia, this issue about income loss, the government has now allowed religious ministers and priests and imams to draw on the job maker subsidy that is being given to workers across Australia whose work has been has ceased or been reduced because of COVID-19. So the Pope also praises the caregivers and frontline workers, remembering that God is always with us. And so I think that science, when it hopefully finally gets a workable vaccine, that religion and faith communities with their religious leaders will be very positive about that good that is being drawn out of this pandemic. So with that, there's much I could say. That's probably enough for the moment, Professor Mary.
Thank you, Professor Des. It's interesting, and we have been saying this through all our webinars. This virus is not a respective person. Irrespective of color, caste, creed, religion, it affects everybody. So one thing that religion can do is either it can be harmful or it can do good. So it is up to the religious leaders to take it forward in a positive way. And what you said is very true. The instances of stigmatization, the problems with burials, all this the religious leaders can help. And the question of hope comes in. People who have faith have hope. So there is a difference, and that is why we are saying there is something called spirituality, there's something called religion. But at the end of the day, to get through this crisis, we need the hope to carry on. And thank you, Professor Kahel, for giving us the Catholic perspective and what the Pope has said. So thank you. I'll move on to Professor Samshuddin from Indonesia. Professor, I'm sorry that we were not able to properly acknowledge you. Professor Samshuddin?
Yes, thank you.
You're from Indonesia, and you're the moderator of Religions for Peace for Asia.
Can I welcome you, Professor Shamsuddin? I'm Russell D'Souza from Australia, who invited you here. Yeah,
thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to join this webinar, but maybe in my capacity as the chairman of the advisory forum for the Indonesian Ulama Council, which is more relevant to our topic. And I would like to share my perspective from the Islamic religion of Islam. The pandemic COVID-19 has added to the Muslim in their belief in two things. Number one, that there is no contradiction between religion and sciences, especially health sciences and also medical sciences. And the second is the belief of the relevance of Islamic teachings to health. With regard to the second, for your information, that all books on Islamic legals, call it fiqh, jurisprudence, started with the book of healthy and cleanliness, Kitabut Tahara, book on cleanliness, and explain many things in detail with regard.
7:30 बजे बात करता हूँ और मुझे कल का हुआ था कि नहीं हुआ था, हमने कल का किसी को किया था कि नहीं? पूजा को बोलो बात करो.
So, pandemic COVID-19 is a blessing in disguise to fulfill totally the Islamic teachings. And therefore, the Indonesian Ulama Council has issued 9 fatwas, Islamic legal opinion from the perspective of Islamic laws with regard to the way of the Muslims behave to protect themselves based on the very ultimate purpose of Islamic Sharia, Islamic legal. Among the 5 ultimate purposes, one of the most important is protecting the self, hifzun nafs, not to do harm to yourself and also to others. And therefore, although congregation, especially during Friday prayer, for example, which is one of the most important congregation in for the Muslims, which is obligatory. But because of the situation, we issued fatwa due to the need for physical distancing that prayer can be done in houses. To move the masjid into our houses, to engage in collective prayer with our family. So this is indeed blessing in disguise. And also, in Islam, the teachings of cleanliness is very much emphasized. Before prayer, we take ablution, call it wudu. And during these times, many detailed things regarding wudu, which are mostly neglected by the Muslims in normal time, like to put water in our nose under the head, is indeed relevance to the message from WHO, from the health sector, and therefore physical distancing is indeed as ordered by Prophet Muhammad during his time, when a disease like this one had happened in that time, and quote his statement, if you realize a disease happened in your city and your area, don't go out.
Okay.
And if you know there's a disease in another place, don't enter that place. This really indeed relevant with the idea of the total lockdown.
Yes.
Indeed, I have been encouraging our government to implement such thing, but then Indonesian government choose the moderate things, and then cause the graphic of the victim in Indonesia is still high. Maybe last point, we believe that there is no contradiction between religion and sciences in Islam, as have been put it by Avicenna, the father of medical studies in the medieval area, that such, protecting themselves, if you come from a pandemic area, for example, you have to wash your hand with a certain ingredient. So, in short, I would like to underline that, number one, there is no contradiction between religion and sciences, and we now have been, deepening our study in the subject matter, and also how to, not to rationalize like the detail in our worship, which have been taught by the religion, are indeed relevant. And this is our way in Indonesia. From all Islamic organization issued a statement, even in the biggest festivals at the end of Ramadan, Idul Fitri, and during the Hajj time, we issued a statement: no need to perform that congregation, especially usually in the fields. You can do it at home. So such matter really put us how to rationalize religion, and we believe that our religion is a religion of reason. So
All
thank
right.
you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shamsuddin. So there are changes in the religious practice during this pandemic.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
There's
right.
kind of adaptation, but
True.
still in the corridor of the Islamic legal opinion.
Within the faith. Yes.
Yeah, within the faith.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor. We'll go to Rabbi Ira. Rabbi, are you there? Rabbi
Yes, yes.
Ira?
Yes, there.
So I thank you. I want to start by saying that all of the presenters so far have been quite thoughtful, and truth is, I will almost be reiterating what many, if not everyone else has said, but I will give my own thoughts on it, knowing that it's in line with all of the other presenters. So the original question is, and I'll put it in my own words, and if it's incorrect, please correct me. Can a rapprochement between science and religion bring peace to the world? And how would that affect, especially today with the COVID-19 pandemic? So first, I think it's a bit of a loaded question because both science and religion really speak to different things. And I think the terminology is more with regards to conflict between scientism and religion or spirituality. If you think about it,
Professor, can you tell us what you mean by scientism?
Yeah, of course. So science really is an empirical observation and a method to look at what one observes in the world and come up with a coherent theory of cause and effect. It's quite skeptical, it's quite reductionist in order to come up with a recognition of natural facts and theories of either physical theories, chemical theories, biological theories on how natural facts come together in a coherent understanding. I'm not going to get into the.
Just for the clarity for our participants.
Yeah. I'm not going to get into the social sciences. Scientism really says we should take that idea of the scientific method of being extremely reductionist, extremely empirical, and we should apply it as a worldview or a philosophy. The difficulty with that is when you apply the scientific method as a way of validating or justifying norms and values in society and in the world, it doesn't allow for any room for a different metaphysics or a different view of what social norms and values can be in order to motivate action. We see how, in that respect, scientism comes in direct conflict with religion and spirituality. Moreover, scientism itself tries to take norms and values in an area where it's not applicable. For example, when you're looking at data and you're trying to interpret a state of affairs, it's very then difficult to say, well, then science demands that one acts on that state of affairs given a set of values. And you see this with the pandemic over and over again. For example, you can quote all the scientific studies that you want, but scientific studies are not going to motivate people to take public health measures or act clinically in a certain way unless there are implicit, implied values that will motivate people to act on that data. Right? So really, religion and science has no conflict because in order to act properly, given the values and metaphysics and beliefs and goals that a religion has, it has to have a clear understanding of what the facts on the ground are. Science will do that. Where religion and scientism come into conflict is there a conflict in that metaphysics and in those values? Moreover, with regards to science and religion creating peace in the world, I think it's very important that religious leaders all over the world recognize the value of science and empirical data, but also recognize the importance of those values in their religion that promote peace as opposed to distinction or conflict. So it is not that the rapprochement between science and spirituality or religion will create peace in the world. Religion, religious leaders, and religious people will create peace in the world by acting on those values that promote it.
All right. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor Ira. Thank you very much. I will move to Professor Aggarwal.
Yes,
Professor
I'm there.
Aggarwal from India.
Yes, I'm there.
Professor, you're also a cardiologist. You're a medical person. So you'll be talking, and you do have a lot of interpretation of through this COVID-19 pandemic through the Vedas, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Dr. Russell, for inviting me here. I'm going to talk about 5 different aspects. This is one subject where you can talk for the whole day. But being in the interest of the time, I have to speak out some basic points. The first point is that Vedic literature is the most ancient literature from where both science and religion originated. As you say that the human body came out of nothing, the human body came out of the consciousness or the intelligence. Similarly, both science and religion originally originated from the unmanifest, and that unmanifest is the intelligence, and that's what most of the Mahavakyas in our Upanishads talks about. So therefore, this science of Vedic sciences is much before both religion and science came. Are they of value to human being? The answer is yes. Remember, as a modern medicine doctor, no medicine will work in my body without finding a receptor. No virus will act in my body without finding a receptor. So therefore, this coronavirus also requires, coronavirus is a key. It has to go to the body, find a receptor where it can unlock, enter, and damage. So no virus and no medicine can work in my body without a receptor. That means if there are locks in my body, the God never created locks in my body for a pharmaceutical company or a virus to come and open it. The very fact there is a lock in my body has the capacity to produce that key. And that information lies in my intelligence, and that is in an extreme degree of parasympathetic state of mind. Therefore, God is an extreme degree of parasympathetic state of mind, a type of a picture where I'm connected, where the macrocosm and the macrocosm are connected with each other without any disturbance. So therefore, my soul, my consciousness, my intelligence is the largest pharmaceutical armamentarium in the world. This knowledge was created by introspection called Shruti and by interpretation, arguments and discussions, and that is Smriti. Vedic knowledge is divided into 2 parts. The first knowledge is given is do it, don't ask questions. That is called Karma Kand. That means you just do it, don't ask questions. These were the 2 parts of the first 2 parts of Vedas, is basically Karma Kand and Brahmins. Third part comes is introspect, learning. That is called Aranyakas part of the Upanishads. And the finally comes is de-learning. When you learn, you have a lot of doubts, and that de-learning is Upanishad. Therefore, Vedic knowledge, Vedas are de-learning and not learning. That's what wisdom is. The difference between intelligence is knowledge is acquiring data, intelligence is how it is used, and wisdom becomes is when you know when not to use this. That is, when you know the word de-learning, it becomes a wisdom. Vedic knowledge in India was passed on because there was no computer, no language, either in the form of a role play or in the form of a Geet. Geet is a song, and that's what today every movie has a song and a role play. That used to be the traditional method. Bhagavad Gita is nothing but a Bhagavad Geet, a dialogue, a recitation, a message communicated in the form of songs with that. Third thing which I want to talk about Vedic literature is, and that comes from Katho Upanishad, where there was a dialogue between a 9-year-old child with Yam. Yam is supposed to be the god of death. And when during the second question he said about fire, he talked about fire, and that is called as Nachiketa's fire. I will come back to this fire again, but he said, whenever you do any action, ask yourself 3 questions. A, have I used all my 10 senses in doing this job? That means I have not diverted my mind, so I have used all my energies, concentrated all my senses in doing this job. Second, whatever I have done, what help I am going to do it for myself? And third, whatever I have learned today, how am I going to use it for the benefit of the universe? So therefore, Vedic sciences basically has a message. Whatever you do, it has to be of use to the mankind. The fourth thing I want to say is, our Vedas talks about Atithi Devo Bhava. Devo means God, Bhava means like, and Atithi means anybody as a guest. So any guest who comes to your house, he treat him like a god. And there is a tradition written in our traditional Vedic literature. So whenever a guest comes, first of all, wash his feet, wash his hand, make him gargle, then do namaste from a distance, give him something to eat, give him a itra so that he can, itra is something to smell, and then you do a namaste, then make him sit in a high pedestal. Now see, a person coming as a foreign body can be a carrier of corona, wash his foot, so corona is out from the shoes, make him wash his hand, so this is soap and water or with sanitizer. Then you ask him to wash his mouth with the povidone iodine solution you give him so that all the viruses present in the mouth are killed. Then you give him something to eat to check for is there any loss of smell and loss of taste or not. So when you give something to eat which is a sweet, so you say sweet taste is intact. Then you give him some smell, you put some smell over it. If he can feel, there is no smell, namaste, physical distancing, make him sit on a high pedestal, no face-to-face meeting. All the principles of prevention are there in one word called Atithi Deva Bhava. Coming back to my last part, and my last part comes from Ayurveda, which comes from Atharveda. Atharveda, there are 4 Veda, Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samveda and Atharveda. Atharveda was the science of treatment, science of life, and Ayurveda basically was the science of life. Ayur means life, Ved means knowledge. The knowledge of, and that scientific knowledge was considered Ayurveda. According to Ayurveda, I have 3 things in my body: movement, metabolism and structure. Every cell of my body, today I am, K.K. Aggarwal is nothing but 6 trillion cells glued together with Higgs boson in the form of a supercomputer. Every cell in my body is a mini K.K. Aggarwal. Every cell has 3 functions to perform: movement, metabolism and structure. These 3 structures form 7 tissues in my body: plasma, blood, muscle, adipose tissue, bone marrow, bone, adipose tissue, and then bone marrow, bone and immunity. These are Rasa, Rakta, Mamsa, Medha, Majja, Asthi, Shukra. 7 tissues in my body. It creates 3 excretions in my body as Mala, but it also talks about Agni. Agni is the internal fire. So my body has Agni, which is present in my stomach, which is the balance Agni of the microbiome and my Agni together, which is the digestive fire of my body, which is represented by high CRP. High CRP, whenever you have a high sensitivity C-reactive protein between 1 and 3, you say your body has slow inflammation, and therefore you are more likely to get metabolic syndrome, which is linked with the diabetes, hypertension, obesity, fatty liver, PCOD, etc. And that Agni in my body, which is reset at a higher level, that means that low level of Agni in my body, when this virus enters in my body, it resets my Agni to a higher level. Rapid rise in C-reactive protein leads to burning in my body. The Agni is on fire. And there are 5 places in Ayurveda about Agni. One is Alochak, which is eyes. So therefore this virus is causing eye manifestations. Number 2, Bhrajak, which is skin. This virus is causing skin manifestations. Third is Pachak, which is stomach. This virus is causing COVID gastritis and COVID gastroenteritis. This virus causes Ranjak, which is blood, plasma and liver. It causes all types of blood plasma disorders. This is in Sadhak, which is the brain and the heart. It is causing myocarditis. Therefore, all the 5 areas mentioned in Ayurveda can explain how this virus is functioning in my body. Modern medicine has no answer. Then Ayurveda says there are 5 types of movements in the body. First type of a movement is called pranavayu, which is your oxygen. Therefore, pranavayu is impaired. Therefore, you get hypoxia. Then he says carbon dioxide is not impaired. You get hypoxia. Your consciousness is not impaired. This is the only condition where in a viral pneumonia you are conscious till end. That means even the last breath you are conscious. Ayurveda talks it as Udan Vayu. That means in this disorder, Udan Vayu does not hamper. Third, it involves the GI movements, which is called Vyan Vayu. Therefore, it is causing GI peristaltic and colicky pain. It is involving Vyan Vayu, therefore it is causing unproportionate tachycardia. It is involving Apan Vayu, therefore you are getting urinary colics and menstrual colics with that. This virus does not involve the joints, which is called Shleshak Kapha. This will not involve joints, which is Shleshak Kapha. It does not involve Tarpak Kapha, which is the CSF, which is happened only in the later stages. It does not involve Avalambak Kapha, therefore it does not cause pleural effusion and pericardial effusion and ascites. So therefore this virus basically is not involving Bothak Kapha, therefore there is no tongue swelling in this particular condition. So Ayurveda and Vedic knowledge not only talks about science, it also explains exactly all the unanswered questions of modern medicine, which system will be spared, which system will not be spared. So 2 things, that the Vedic philosophy is a science. We can find out why COVID-19, today we say COVID-19 can present with anything. That's what everybody says, everything. But then why joints are not getting affected? And Vedic science says no, that joints will not be affected if the Shleshak Kapha is not affected, joints will not be affected. So there is a science behind every type of a movement. That is, we have 5 basic elements. Now coming back to the last thing, and the last thing is that Hinduism basically belongs of 6 philosophies and 6 evidences. Vedas have 6 philosophies and 6 evidences. The first philosophy is Nyaya. They want logic. Nothing will be accepted without a logic. Second is Vaishashik. That means everything has to be explainable in the language of quantum physics. That is Vaishashik. Third is Sankhya philosophy, which talks about wave particle duality, which part about unmanifest and manifest, that everything is made out of unmanifest, is called Sankhya philosophy. Fourth is Yoga philosophy, will talk about the union of mind with the body and the soul. And if mind is the bandwidth, if you can reduce your bandwidth, you are connected to the soul. That is called yoga, union of mind with the body and the soul. And union of in between, unless the mind is tamed, you cannot shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic mode. So yoga is a science which allows you to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic mode. And then comes is Mimamsa. Mimamsa is whatever is written in the book, don't question it. Bible, whether you have Granth, whether you have Quran, don't question that. That's Mimamsa philosophy. And then comes is Vedantic philosophy, which talks about two things, Dvait and Advait, dualism and non-dualism, means God is different than me or I am a part of the God. These are two different types of philosophies. Vedanta basically talks about is Aham Brahmasmi and Tattvamasi, God is in me. And the last thing is there are 6 evidences in Vedism. The first evidence is Pratyaksh. If I have seen a virus, then only I will believe. If I have not seen a virus, I cannot. So today, all the RT-PCR tests, I cannot see the virus. Therefore, I will say I have no evidence whether this virus is alive or not. Second is Anuman. Anuman is postulation. That's what we do, blind study, double blind study, single blind study. These are called Anuman. Upaman, analogy. You say that in this virus, I have checked the antigen, I have checked the targeted antigen. Therefore, this antigen should be the antigen of the virus, that is analogy. Next is Arthapati, which means circumstantial evidence. That this is the circumstantial evidence that the mortality of COVID-19 is different in various countries. So therefore, that's what you say, Arthapati. Then Anuplabdhi means negation. That not this, not this, not this, therefore this. That's the evidence. And last is Shabda, which is observation. That means today, everything here is an observation. Whenever there is a novel virus, evidences are created out of observations. Observations are converted into different types of a philosophy. So therefore, Vedic sciences are the original science from where both religion and science came, and they are the originator of the science. Thank you very much for giving me the time.
Thank you, Professor Aggarwal. There's a lot in the chat box saying we can have just one entire webinar on this, but I have another 8 more panelists, so thank you very much. I will go to Reverend Masaki from Japan. Reverend, sorry, and thank you for waiting. Please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. Yeah, right. Thank you. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you, KK Aggarwal.
Reverend Masaki, you're from the Japanese Zen Buddhist philosophy. And could you give us your, we are talking about interfaith and the role of science and interfaith in mitigating, that is reducing this COVID-19 pandemic, your views from the Zen Buddhism.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes.
Referred by Regions for Peace Japan, I'm honored to participate in this meeting today. Also interested in looking for areas where we can amalgamate between science and spirituality. Let me begin my opening message with my experience of living in New York City in April. I'm in Japan, and tomorrow I'm flying to JFK too.
Okay.
I was living in a house where healthcare workers who are infected with the COVID-19 also lived. Even though contained myself, there were many areas that we had to share for living. Every single day, day by day, the media delivered the news about the endless spread of the virus. It also showed many refrigerator trucks set up on city streets outside hospitals to accommodate the overflow of bodies. The circumstances of the pandemic made it seem as if contracting the virus meant death. Every day was terrifying to me. Every day was survival for me. I always put on my mask and gloves even when I go to the bathroom and the kitchen. Because I had asthma, I took extra precautions, including living by cutting down the number of orders of meals and groceries. I made my life as simple as possible. I could. What I needed was just enough to eat and wear. My story could be shared with other generations and people in different cultural contexts as a fear experience of the pandemic. For the purpose of this conference day, however, I would like to suggest something else from my story. Given the uncertainty about the trajectory of the pandemic, as well as its extreme challenges in many areas of our lives, I think it is a time that we are urged to take action for the moral imperative that is called forth in us when we discipline our minds and see the nature of reality, others, and ourselves. What exactly is a moral imperative? Simply put, it is a drive that emerges within us that calls us to act for the benefit of others. It calls us to bring a kind of altruism to the problems of our day, of our society, whatever those problems are. Ask myself, what am I to do? Here is what I advise myself and want to share with you for what it is worth. First of all, the most important
मीन्स अगर ऐसे करेंगे ना तो लोअर पोर्शन बहुत ज्यादा आ रहा है अपना